Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar. I'm Ashley from Financial Narrative. As you know, Financial Narrative is the free community for financial marketing and communications professionals. And we're excited to have so many of you joining us here today for this excellent event with Bill Heyman and Andrew Williams. If you're interested in joining Financial Narrative, if you're not already a member, please feel free to send me an email. And if you're looking to host future events or to join the community, please do check out our website, financialnarrative.org. And now I'd like to introduce our host, Andrew Williams, who is a Managing Director of Corporate Communications at Goldman Sachs. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ashley. And thanks for everyone for joining us. And thanks for Financial Narrative for hosting this. And happy 2021. Things are looking up. At least we have to tell ourselves that. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Bill Heyman, who's an authority on executive recruiting. He's the founder and CEO of Heyman Associates. He's been responsible for filling top communications roles for some of the most recognized brands in the world, including leading corporations, foundations, academic institutions, and professional associations. Bill is the only recruiter to be named PR Power List Supporting Power Player 3 times by PR Week. And this is my most, I'm very excited about this. In late February, the 5th annual Arthur W. Page Center Awards will honor Bill, along with Judy Woodruff of the PBS NewsHour, Eugene Robinson, Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post columnist, and none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. That's quite a group there, Bill. And all of them will receive the Larry Foster Award for Public Integrity, or for Integrity in Public Communications. The award is recognition of long careers of ethically and responsibly communicating with the public. So with all that said, you should know that Bill gives great advice and has been doing that for some time. So we're going to pick his brain. I'm going to ask some questions and then invite you guys to send in questions, and I'll put them to Bill later in this hour. So Bill, how are you?
I am fine, and really thank you for having me, Ashley. And I'm actually thrilled to be doing with Andrew. In preparation for this, Andrew and I have gotten to be pals. And as I've said about this Arthur Page Center Award, most of the people in the industry have been really kind and blown away about me receiving this award. And my friends, my closest friends, have all said, you know, who doesn't belong and why. So I am going to try to be as graceful as I can be among Tony Fauci, Eugene Robinson, Judy Woodruff. So thank you for mentioning that.
Well, we're excited. We are excited for you. So where do we find you today, and where have you spent the pandemic?
You know what? That's a great question. I'm not going to bore you with this, but everybody I talk to, I get on my cell phone and I show them a picture of the Long Island Railroad. I live on Long Island. The Long Island Railroad for the one day I've been in Manhattan in the past 10 months, just to show people how empty the train was. But on my last business trip was to Washington. I went down to Washington on the 11th. I had a meeting on the 12th. I took the shuttle back to New York the afternoon of the 12th, and I've been working from our home on Long Island ever since. And I Zoom with my Heyman Associates colleagues and our clients, but it's been pretty surreal. I would argue, though, we've figured this out pretty well, and it's actually become a little bit of a competitive advantage in the marketplace for us, but I can get into that later. But so anyway, I'm at home. I'm at home, and I would say the plus side of it is I no longer have a 3-hour commute, an hour and a half which way. I gotten to spend a lot more time with my wife, who was kind enough to 3 months into it get us a dog. We've always had dogs, but we didn't have one at the time. And now, of course, she went back into the office. She goes to the office from 7:30 until 4:30 every day, and I've got to figure out how to handle this dog. That's, by the way, I'm warning you in case it becomes she makes an appearance while we talk.
That'll be fine. Well, just in an effort for the audience to get to know you, is there anything during the pandemic that's sort of spoken to you, whether it's a book or some hobby or anything like that?
Oh, well, okay, that's fair. So yeah, it's ironic. Not having the commute means I have to carve out my reading time because of the train time kind of forced me. So, I have been doing a fair amount of reading. I'm actually reading a book called Wild Thing right now. It's the biography of Jimi Hendrix, but I've read a lot of important books while we've been locked down. Like a lot of people, I read To Be an Anti-Racist and White Fragility immediately after the George Floyd thing to get a better understanding of what was going on in the world. My wife and I do a lot of binge watching of shows on Prime and Netflix, and I've been able to carve out a little bit more time for exercise. I do, but I do this. I'm sure you do as well, but I'm on Zoom calls or Microsoft Meetings calls from basically 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning till 6 or 7 at night. So it's been a very productive time, even though it's been very different.
Well, could you go into a little bit more of that? I mean, those are some changes, but how has the role you play, how has recruitment changed during the pandemic, if it has?
So that's a really fair question. I mean, number one, the notion that we've actually placed people since March who have virtually never, where they've never physically met each other, meaning that the client, CEO, chief HR person, people like that have not had actually handshake kind of meetings with candidates. But what I've tried to assure both candidates and clients of is that what people have now is time and privacy. So I urge our clients, and I urge the candidates as well, I urge our clients to basically allot for 2 Zoom gatherings with a candidate. One would be just to get to know the person, just to get to know them, and that might be more the second one, only because they're going to want to find out about what the person can do, talk about job description, why they might be interested, and how they might work through issues around the pandemic. And then the second one would be the kind of get to know you. And one of the nuances that we're finding right now is that there are candidates over-indexing on the fact that they're working from home and they think they may stay working from home for a long, long time. So they might express some interest in a job where ultimately they're going to have to relocate. And we let them know that this is temporary, and eventually you may have to relocate. And clients will let you know whether or not they think this is a job where it is going to be necessary for the person to physically move to where the corporate headquarters is, or whether or not that they feel that they can continue to do this remotely. But let's face it, if you're the head of the function, you likely have to be where the headquarters is, because A, you've got to have the access to your team, and B, you've got to have the access to the executives who you're going to be working most closely with, including the CEO. So that nuance of doing this Zoom stuff we talk about that a lot. And then of course the other part of that, which is it changes day to day, Andrew, is the whole notion of, okay, decisions have been made. I've decided I'm going to take this job. I've been offered the job. I'm going to take it. And now what I'm confronted with is I may not be moving tomorrow, but I do need to see my new place. I do need to meet the person. And there are 2 issues that we get confronted with. One is that, the candidate who wants to physically fly to some new place and meet what's going on in those communities. Are there quarantining issues that have to be dealt with? And we had one particular situation where the person was a candidate for a chief communications officer job, and they were working with the CEO, and the two of them both decided, well, let's figure out a way to meet now, because it's, and it seemed innocent enough. But I said to them, so play this out for me. A year from now, we're all back to something that's somewhat normal. You're at a cocktail party, said, so how did this all happen? Well, it happened, we did it through Zoom, it was all virtual. And so-and-so and I snuck out, we met one another and figured that we could work together, and therefore the deal was struck. You're the head of communications. You don't want to be saying that you broke that rule. So we've really had to sort of, and by the way, from our standpoint, sure, we want them to get together and meet. We want to speed the process up, but it really is important that whatever sort of the state guidelines are for whatever state we happen to be doing a search in are adhered to during the pandemic.
So are there a couple examples of interesting searches that you've done during the pandemic that you can talk about?
Well, we had one where it was an academic institution, and the candidate needed to meet with a whole variety of committees. So it wasn't just one-on-one Zooms, but a whole variety of committees. And each person on these Zoomings had their own discrete question they needed to ask. And then when it was all done, the client said, well, we this is a person we really want to hire. And we ran into this quarantine situation where the person literally would have had to fly to the state where the job was, which is in Massachusetts, quarantine for 14 days before they could even meet with people at the university. So we basically had a situation where we said, let's wait to see how long Massachusetts has a 14-day quarantine and see if we can wait this out a bit. So the client and the candidate both agreed this is something they wanted to do. They kicked the can down the road in terms of when they might actually be comfortable doing it, Andrew, and then the quarantine was broken, so they were able to do a little bit more quickly. I've had several. One I can speak about pretty openly. We placed a gentleman at General Motors in the midst of this, and his whole situation was he hasn't been able to meet his team. It's a global job, so he's got people who work from all over the country. Spent a fair amount of time physically with Mary Barra, the CEO, but it has been a real challenge in terms of managing and meeting people, and you're just the Zoom process becomes exhausting. So, again, I think our part of it has been relatively straightforward. I think the fact that we've been able to spend a lot of time with candidates and clients, and that we've gotten them to have a little bit more, it's become a little bit more personalized, a little bit more intimate. But it's when you get that new job and you can't do some of the things that you're used to doing. And of course, as we all know, the ironic part of all this is the communications is the linchpin to all this right now when it comes to the pandemic, because senior management, they know how to run their companies, but they didn't know how to handle this. So anyway.
True. I'm sure the audience is filled with both those people that are looking to explore new jobs and also some people who are continuing to build teams. But with the cycle of compensation inside the financial services industry, this is a point of time in the year that everyone says, well, maybe now is the time that I should start looking around. Do you feel that there's, those that are hoping for jobs, I think, hope that there's some dam's going to break and there's so much activity happening soon. Do you see that?
Yes, I think your description is correct. I think when the pandemic first happened, most of us, when we were all told we were going to be working from home, we were all told we were going to be working from home for a while, that and I would argue senior management were more like deer in the headlights than the rest of us at some level, because we kind of said, all right, you know what? I just want to be safe. I want to make sure my family's safe. I want to make sure everybody's okay. And it'd be great if I could hold on to my job, but you know, the other stuff is a priority. And now all of a sudden, especially when it came to the whole employee experience or employee engagement, that became a real test for companies. Now, and then, so it was bumpy for a while. Now it got to a point where people said, all right, we've got these things relatively organized now in terms of how to work in a virtual world. Let's get back to sort of business as normal. And now we have seen, and you hit it on the head, I would argue it probably started, you know, December is usually a slow time for us because people are wrapping Christmas presents and getting ready to go off to the ski slopes. We were busy, and we've been busy, and busier than any time in the 10 months since the pandemic. And it's not just in the financial service industry, all that has been strong, but it has been in other areas where you'd expect that healthcare is, you know, when think about it, in healthcare was an interesting scenario. I say that because what happened in healthcare was you had the biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies in March and April that the last thing in the world they were doing was thinking about their hiring. Any hiring we were doing for companies like that completely stopped it because they were all focusing on creating therapeutics or creating vaccines. Same way, healthcare providers, they weren't thinking about branding or adding to their teams. Andrew, what they were thinking about is how are we going to be able to provide enough hospital beds for sick people? Once that somewhat stabilized, that broke. And you know, again, for edification, our company focuses strictly in corporate communications, public affairs, branding, and the like, but it's across all industries. So, you know, we do I would probably say 20 to 25% of our work may be in financial services, but a lot of it's in healthcare, education, and the like.
Do you find that is supply meeting demand? Is there a glut, or is there too few? How does that match up?
That's a great question. It's also a bit of an evergreen question. I don't necessarily think it is. I want to be thoughtful about this. So I would say that what's happening right now is that our clients are looking for what I often refer to as great athletes. And what I mean by that is people who have the versatility to be a good writer, a good thinker, a good presenter, and also someone who is significantly well-read and thoughtful about the issues of the day. Because where companies are feeling a little bit adrift right now is how do we move forward with all of the issues that are surrounding us that are distracting us from doing our jobs. So when I said before about the deer in the headlights piece and what I would call the early employee engagement piece, how do we keep our employees engaged during a pandemic? How do we both let them work from home and not behave as if we're suspicious if they're really working or not, and make them feel they're engaged and part of the community as they would be if they were at work? And then when George Floyd was murdered, there was a lot of reaction to what a lot of us aren't doing as much as we could and should when it comes to diversity and inclusion, and how do we get more, how do we demonstrate that what our commitment to these issues are going to be are real and have a stickiness to them moving forward. Just one aside, because I think it's relevant. I heard a discussion with Alan Murray of Fortune, I would say maybe 4 months into the pandemic. And he said some interesting things. And one of them he said, which is fascinating, is he said to every CEO he talks to, Andrew, he says to them, when will you go back to traveling the way you traveled pre-pandemic? And to a person, they all said never. And then he said, in difficult economic times, it's always been that social programs, whether they be environmental programs, diversity inclusion programs, tend to get skinny down. And to a person, they all said that will never be the case again. Corporate social responsibility, D&I programs will be really critical to companies going forward. Part of it is, the Business Roundtable statement from a while back. And so I guess what I'm saying is that what communicators have to provide in terms of counsel to senior management as they try to create strategic programs that really demonstrate a commitment to being better citizens, better communities, creating better communities, they're real. And so there is a need for communications to be at the forefront of that. And therefore the natural progression there is, are there enough people that can provide that kind of counsel?
Well, let's focus a minute on people that are either hiring managers or looking to grow a team. I think you touched on a couple of things, like what is a successful way for people building the team to approach diversity?
So I think the companies that are doing this from their back foot, that haven't done as much as they should have up to now, are having issues and are trying to, and they're scrambling. What I'm starting to see is some superficial approaches to this that worry me a little bit. For instance, diverse CCOs, several of them have come to me and say that I've been asked to take on the diversity inclusion for the company. And my response to and they're calling me and they're asking me that from a career counseling standpoint. Is this something I do? Will this be good for my career? And my response is, it'll be good for your career if there's a real commitment to it and you have an interest in doing something beyond communications from an operations standpoint. Because while it's a big communications component, it is definitely more of an operations thing. And you're also talking about creating a sea change at your company. And but if it is a Band-Aid and it's superficial because it's a person of color running a D&I program, I worry about that. I worry. So I think there really needs to commitment. I also think that people need to take the stuff I mentioned, white fragility and how to be an anti-racist. I think people need to take these conversations, which are much more difficult and much more awkward than we think, and be willing to bare their souls a little bit about that. And that is to say, we haven't been good at this. We haven't been successful at this. I mean, I always think about people of color who are my contemporaries and my colleagues and my friends who we don't have what I'll call the conversation that often. And I'm maybe bastardizing that a little bit, but if a person of color is a CEO, I actually talked to someone just recently who's a very senior level person for what I basically describe it, it's a consumer product company, but it's sort of in the wine and spirits business. And this person went into a big liquor store and to basically buy some of the products that his company made for actually, it was something to do with work. It was going to be, in other words, because there weren't these social gatherings, it was something to do with work. And it was on the weekend, and the owner of the store hounded this person, followed them around as if they were worried about, they were going to do something that they shouldn't be doing. And those kinds of conversations need to be had, and companies need to be much more open about when they're going to create a much greater diverse workforce to really support that. And I think that there are some companies that are trying, and by the way, the industry in general is trying really hard, but it's been a disaster, for over the, I mean, it's been, I think that something like 4 to 6% of the overall industry is ethnically diverse. So they've got to try better at it. And what we try to be careful about in terms of our clients. So we've been pretty good at this. I would say that rarely is there not a person of color or more than one, I should say, on any slate that we give to a client. But the clients also may look and say, well, this person doesn't have quite the ingredients that we're looking for whatever job it is you're saying. And I always say, is there something else of equal heft that can be created to bring this person on? And of course, you worry a little bit about, is that headhunter speak? Is that, oh, you want to make another placement? But it really has more to do with, because our number, we're very proud of what we've been able to do in placing people of color, but you really need to, it needs to be a long-term commitment and always with an open mind of bringing people in that are just diverse in general, in thinking, in color, in what they can bring to an organization. And by the way, that does get into, sort of, it bleeds into a little bit about this whole, the notion of that all the folks that are listening today are from the financial service industry. I always tell clients that we will always be able to put together a slate. If you're talking specifically about the hiring part, Andrew, we'll always be able to find people that have experience in, because what we do, and we've been doing this for 31 years, in the specific area that you're looking to hire. But you should also be open-minded, because my guess is you've got a few bankers at Goldman Sachs. So I don't necessarily know that you need to hire another banker in your corp comm department if you were hiring someone tomorrow. And if you think about the diversity of backgrounds, you and I talked when we were prepping for this about having sort of, liberal arts backgrounds. I mean, I think finding people that have done really interesting things in their lives. I'm always fascinated by that. People who have traveled abroad. I mean, I know you taught in Japan. I mean, I think those kinds of experiences are extremely compelling. And to me, they're tipping point experience to putting you in front of a client that's really looking for someone that's going to give them true thought leadership.
Well, you have a very interesting seat for a lot of us who have ever gone on a job interview, because you're able to talk to management and you talk to us. So what do you think candidates that are good in your estimation who don't impress management when they're interviewing, what is it they're doing wrong, or what are the skills are they missing? It's sort of a news we could all use of like, how could we do a better job of persuading management that we would be the right person for them? So
that's a very perceptive question. And I would argue that we do better at this now in the pandemic, because the CEO or whoever in management is doing the interviewing doesn't have somebody waiting for them outside their office. Say, all right, I've only got 15 minutes for you. We've allotted an hour, or we've allotted a half hour, whatever it is, and I'm going to get to know this person better. Because invariably, I would argue that when these things break down, and again, it's not because we're perfect. It's not because every candidate we put in front of a client is absolutely, the right person for the job. But I think there is the notion that there's, in theory anyway, there should be better listening going on right now. That the listening component of the job, because, when you're doing this, and, especially if you're on with 2 or 3 people sometimes, and as I told you before, some of these interviews are with multiple people, it's so easy to not read the body language over Zoom and start talking when the other person's talking. But I think if it's one-on-one, there's a chance to really be able to talk about what people what makes them tick. And so it's kind of our job sometimes to tell the client, or to ask the client, give me the top 5 or 10 things that you really have to have. And invariably the client will say, well, I need someone who can give me, good strategic counsel. I need a good writer, because there are 2 or 3 times a year where I want this person to do this person's the only person I want to do some writing for me because I want to keep it confidential or whatever it is. I need someone who can be a good team manager, good team leader, because either A, I think we've got a pretty good group here of up and coming people, but they haven't been led well, or I'm very underwhelmed by what we've got, and therefore we need somebody to come in who can fix that. And then you start getting into, I would prefer that they had industry experience. I would prefer they had further, not, beyond industry experience. Maybe, we're not just talking about banking, but maybe they've come from a hedge fund, or maybe they've done asset management or something that further. And so from all of that, I would argue that it really becomes a matter of, where do you make these compromises? Where is it? Where are you willing to? So it might be that, man, I was really impressed with this person, but they've told me they've never done any speech writing, and I really might need them to write a speech, but I guess we could go out and hire somebody from the outside. Or that I found that they're really thoughtful. They've spent a little bit too much time maybe being an individual contributor, so I do have some concern of whether they would be a manager. Now, that would be up to us to make sure that we say to them, look, they've managed teams, but they've been small teams. They've been 8 or 10. You have a 50-person department here. So if you think it can translate, and we do, then you pull the trigger. But there just has to be, it's got to be a brutally honest kind of conversation.
What do you think are common mistakes candidates have made in interviews?
I'm fixated on one. So the first one I'm gonna say is talking too much. Mm-hmm. By the way, which is what I feel like I'm doing. But anyway, the other one is not preparing, meaning not knowing enough about. Okay, so
okay, let me. How do you prepare? How do you?
That's fair enough. I was just gonna say it. So I was doing this. I think it's somewhere on my bio. It says that I graduated in 1974 from Gettysburg College. I always kid about the fact that I was there 2 days after Lincoln left. So when I first got in this business, one of the ways, if you were a candidate for a job, and you said, Bill, that does sound like a really exciting opportunity, I would physically, now remember, this is 35 years ago, I would physically send you a piece of paper with a job description on it and a copy of the annual report from the client. And your job would be to read the job description, understand what they're looking for, and then understand both from a financial standpoint and a strategy standpoint what the annual report was articulating. Well, obviously, all that stuff's available online. So it is amazing to me how when candidates get into a conversation, irrespective of whether it's a pandemic or not, and aren't prepared and don't know what the company went through. I had a situation years ago where this would have been a very simple situation. Just turn the news on in the morning. The CEO of the company that this candidate was interviewing for had a heart attack. And candidate never turned on the news, didn't read the newspaper that morning. I get it. They got up early, they showered, they were driving to an interview, and there was no cell phones, no internet. But they got there, and when the client put them off a little bit, and they weren't even interviewing with the CEO, by the way, we were interviewing with other people, but they got put off and got a little testy about it. And then when they realized what had happened, they felt badly, but it was too late because they had been rude to people, saying, "Look, you're keeping waiting." Well, they keep them waiting because they were in a full crisis mode. So I think really understanding, whether or not the company has an activist investor in their midst, whether or not there's management changes afoot, whether or not there's some possible merger or whatnot, really being prepared. But as I said before, the listening piece, the being prepared piece, and then believe it or not, the appropriate kind of, there are these nuances. I often I use the Malcolm Gladwell. He had two terms that were sort of, to me, interchangeable. One was tipping point, one was thin slicing. And I'm talking about literally like candidates who I really was excited about this person. I looked at their resume and they were great. And then I came and met with them and they never looked me in the eye once. Or they came in and their shoes weren't shined or what, obviously you're not going to get that today in Zoom. But I mean, there are these, they didn't send follow-up note. They didn't send a thank you note. They misspelled my name. I mean, so many of these things seem so obvious, but they're eliminators. Most of them, right, they eliminate.
Well, I want to remind everybody listening that feel free to send in some questions and we'll get to that shortly. I think everyone's always interested in hearing from someone like you about compensation and how does a job candidate approach, you don't want to seem greedy, but it matters as well. So how should they approach that with someone like you or with an HR team at a
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I am hoping to retire before I get thrown in jail, but you're no longer supposed to ask people what they're making. So, and I usually say that to people. I'm not allowed to ask you anymore what you're making, in hoping they'll say, well, I'll tell you anyway. But so the term today is expectation. What are your compensation expectations? I will give some sort of general thought about this. I think that if you're happy where you are doing well where you are, but you've been there a while and think it might be time for a change, I think you need to think about making a move where the compensation would bump you up in the 20 to 25% range. And you also think that you feel comfortable enough with the new place that it's going to be a place where you can stay long enough to also get some wealth creation on the equity side. That said, making lateral, so I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth. I'll probably call some candidate this afternoon and tell them I think they need to make a lateral move because I think the opportunity is just too good, and the upside on the equity will make up the difference between what their base and bonus might be. So I do think you need to make these decisions. I don't want to, for 1 minute, not. I mean, look, think about it. I mean, we can talk all about the nuances of what makes a job move make sense, and that the salary thing may not be, the money may not be the only thing. But let's face it, we as recruiters, we don't get paid because there's better chemistry, it's a better culture fit. We get paid on the compensation. So the compensation kind of is the sort of the top thing for people. And so I think that's a really a critical component. People need to look at what their compensation is, but also make sure that they feel good about the reporting relationship, the growth of the company, if they're a globalist, whether the company's global or not, if they're committed to things like diversity inclusion, are they pleased with what the company is doing in that area, and are they going to be able to potentially have an impact on that? So all these things are nuances, but so the money thing, as I said, I say 20, 25% if all else is kind of can be felt to be.
And in your experience, I mean, how much room is there for negotiation on salary with someone who's potentially hiring?
That's a really, really great question, Andrew. I feel for people, truthfully, when they're doing this on their own, when there's not a recruiter involved, because, number one, there are sometimes when I'm asked by somebody, can you give me a hand on this? Because I'm really not, they're not using a recruiter, and I'm not quite sure how to do this, that I'll say, look, this seems like a really good offer. This is a really good opportunity. Just say yes and move on. Conversely, you don't want to sort of either be taken advantage of, or if it's a company that listen, there are certain people who gravitate toward messy situations. They're good at crisis. They're good at CEO whispers. They're good at the episodic issues that come up. and they like to go to companies that are going through transformations. And there's a premium that a company should pay for that, though, because especially if they're getting someone who's got experience in having transformed a company or a culture or a brand or a department before, then they need to pay up for that.
I'm going to throw in some of the questions we're getting from the audience. Carmen Knoll asks, is there a particular skill set that you see people looking for, such as digital marketing or e-commerce?
Yeah, no, I think that today more than ever, people want to make sure that folks have digital chops. But I go back to at the senior level, they want writing, they want thinking, they want ability to tell truth to power. And yes, they want, if the person doesn't have their own set of sort of digital experiences, digital chops, that they've managed it or they know how to access it or whatnot. But so I'm here. I guess the best way for me to describe this is an offshoot of that question has been, over the time that I've been doing this, what have I seen that in the department, in the function, that has changed? And the function is very much an additive function. So we didn't throw anything out. Well, maybe we threw out the fax machine, but we didn't throw anything out when we added the digital world. So I think that it is an additive, and it's also from a strategic standpoint. I mean, again, if I think, as I said before, 35 years, when we started in this business, we were handling $75,000 a year sort of manager or director level searches. Not only have we grown because of our sort of our staying power, if you will, Andrew, but the function itself has become so much more strategic. There are so many more people in the top communications role that report into the CEO that didn't in the earliest years. So the digital thing is a new tool, but it's by the way, it's a tool. There's very few of our clients right now that don't ask questions. And by the way, they ask questions and give as wishy-washy an answer as I gave about D&I, but they're asked those questions in interviews. So, it might have used to be, tell me about your media contacts, tell me about a crisis you've handled, tell me about a transition you've dealt with, whether it's a CEO or a merger or something, tell me about a digital platform you've built to become a more thoughtful company about handling social media. And then, tell me what you have done personally to increase diversity and inclusion in the organizations for whom you've worked.
And Bill, that reminds me of some previous conversations we've had where you've said that those kind of specific examples are very effective in interviews, rather than a lot of times we speak in generalities of projects we've done. Could you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. So if you go back to the question you asked before, how do people kind of screw up the interviews? And I said, talking too much and not being prepared. I would say the third piece is not being specific enough about what they've done. The hard thing in our world, in the recruiting world, and it's going to sound like a cop-out sometimes, is because so much of what we do is under the cloak of confidentiality. But you need to, so for instance, sometimes when it comes to things like diversity and inclusion, will sound very broad, but the reality is we're gonna push our clients hard because it makes everybody look good. And I like the idea of, as I said, the secondary hire in a situation where you said, look, if this is really something you're committed to doing. But so to get to your point before, having specific examples, if you could specifically talk about how you, maybe it's a non-story, meaning it's how you put out a fire so there wasn't a story about something that happened at your company, or how you handled the integration, if you're on the internal side, integration of an acquisition that was made, or what you did when the CEO inadvertently tweeted something that was not necessarily was misconstrued or something like that. I think being able to give specific examples to the extent that people can. And again, sometimes there's an issue about confidentiality, but you need to go into the interview prepared for talking about those things you can talk about.
What do you think about advice to people who are, this is a question from the audience, about advice to people trying to move from one sort of subset of communications to another, like internal to media or media to marketing? How do people navigate that?
That's a great question. And the reason it's a great question, it's a little like early on in my career when I would talk to agency people, it would say, you know, I am invaluable to my agency working on the XYZ account, but I'm trying to move off that because I don't want to be, you know, just an expert in aerospace or something like that. And yet, when I talk to them about other things, and that's one of the problems here is that, you know, if you're considered to be a terrific media relations person, but you really want to get some employee engagement, employee experience relevance, then how do you do that? I think you need to raise your hand and ask, and basically be able to say, look, I need this to round myself out. And if a person says, well, we can't afford to take you off of this in order to do this, then it's time to update your resume and send it to us, because I just think it's then you've hit a plateau in a way where a company is not really thinking about how can we take how effective you are in one area and make you just as effective in another area.
And someone's asked whether, you know, an exclusive agency experience at some point starts to become a handicap. How far into a career does someone think about jumping in-house versus agency work?
Look, I love when I talk, especially when we talk to young people, I think the three things that I often tell young people in terms of starting off in a career is try to get agency experience, some kind of journalistic experience or political experience, because every one of those experiences, there's a pace to it. And so you immediately learn how to operate in the pace that you and all of the audience understands that communication is all about. I think that getting agency experience early on is great. I would argue that if you have, you know, if you really want to go on the client side, spending maybe more than 8 years in that first job. But I think the other thing too is, I often talk about the fact that when I interview someone who's got 8 years of experience and they've had 4 jobs in that 8 years, my response to that is not always the other person's fault. You know, when you tell me, well, the reason the first thing didn't work out was because my supervisor didn't allow me to grow enough, or the second one didn't work out because I was plateaued on one account or something like that. Hang in there. I have had more professional satisfaction telling young people that who are unhappy 6 months after they get that first job, and I tell them, just hang in there, deal with it, tough it out, whatever term you want to use, that 2 years later they've stayed there, they've grown, they actually may even like it, and it has enabled them to have a much smoother move to someplace else, rather than, well, because I had a conversation with, this is not relevant to this at all, but I had a friend of mine from college who sent me an email the other day about his son. And he said his son has been in the banking industry for 15 years and has had 8 different jobs, and now has an opportunity to go to work for a really exciting new job. But he, my friend, was suggesting to his son, don't do it. You jumped around way too much. And I responded and I said, I get what you're saying, and I probably would believe what you're saying, but the brand that he's going to work for is so strong that I would say he should do it, but he should make it work. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's so I look, again, the point is, agency experience, I think, is terrific. I love the diversity of it. I love the fact that you might be working on a crisis plan for one client, writing a white paper for another client, doing an employee engagement plan for another. That there's great diversity, and that those clients may be diverse in their industry. but don't jump around for $5,000 or $10,000 from agency to agency in those early years. So.
Well, relatedly, how difficult is it for candidates to change industries?
It's really difficult if they're hoping that we'll be able to do it, because recruiters tend to get very specific, focused assignments. They want us to find them somebody that's got 25 years of experience in financial services and a combination of asset management and PE work or something like that. But I think that's when networking is really important, because at the end of the day, if you're a good writer, you're a good thinker, you've demonstrated an ability to work and counsel well with CEOs, you should be in enough rarefied atmosphere to be able to move from an industry to another industry. And we all know, really, the person that I mentioned at General Motors came out of the healthcare industry. So I mean, it really has. That's when I get into that whole notion of, if they're a good athlete, if they've got good, sound skills, then they can make those kinds of transitions. It sounds like I'm avoiding the question, but there isn't a special formula for that.
Mm-hmm. Some of you have been protecting your names, but I'm not going to protect Josh Drobnik at Robinhood. He just joined and has plenty of work to do there. He's asked Bill, wants to know, Bill, about onboarding during this remote period. If there's, things you've seen that work well, and, challenges and opportunities.
Well, number one, when you're as charming as Josh is, that won't be that much of a challenge. But I think what you want to do, Josh, is try to early on set up Zoom meetings with as many of the people that will be reporting in or cascading into you as possible, so that you are showing them that you're as interested in their world as you are as a senior manager in this world. Same thing if the company gets any counsel from outside counsel, get outside agents, get to know those people and try to, it's like with any job, you don't want to start making wholesale changes right away. And when your management pushes you to do that, explain to them that you need to do your listening tour before you can do that, and what's made you effective and what you've done throughout the course of your career is because you've been able to listen carefully to getting a sense of the nuances, the culture, the chemistry, and all. You'll do great.
I agree. Bill, as our final question, what is it that people like me and all of us on here, when we engage with you or someone like you, how can we make your life easier? And how can we help you help us better?
I think really, it's so funny you asked that, because my initial reaction is you just need to be straight with us. I mean, there is nothing more embarrassing for us is when we get all excited about you, we put you in front of a client, you seem to be pretty interested in it, the client seems to be pretty interested in it, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, by the way, I'm taking another job. You don't have to tell me what the other job is, but let me know that that's going on up front. When that, that you'd be surprised the red marks in our database and our LinkedIn files that appear when people do that. I mean, I think just being straight, I kid all the time about, headhunters are people too, but so it's just a matter of being straightforward. And that, by the way, it cascade. Like, for instance, the other thing too is being straightforward with your resume. I'll tell one story real quickly. There's a guy that I met who was my contemporary, graduated from college the exact same year I did. Very successful career in the energy business, but his company was bought by another major oil company, and he was out of work. He sends me his resume. His resume has taken 20 years off his career, to the point where, which is really bad, he literally said he graduated from college 20 years later than he actually did. But irrespective of that, which is terrible, but be straightforward. You know, I'm not going to walk into an interview. I'm not going to walk into an interview and people are going to say that, oh, I thought you were 35. Yeah, it's not going to happen. You know, they're going to say, and so I think as being straight, especially in an era where transparency is so important, I just think being straight is, you know.
So how does the audience get themselves on your radar?
Oh, I think what I say in general to people about not only ours, but our competitors and whatnot, is be known for doing good work. Be known for doing good work. Do appropriate kind of networking. And when I mean appropriate, I mean, don't be one of these people that I always, you know, if I get Josh Drubnick's resume tomorrow, you know, because he's updating it already, because he just, you know, he's so opportunistic that he's not. He's a great guy, actually. And Josh, we placed Josh at FINRA, so he and I have been friends for a good bit. But, you know, those people that I've met, they're so opportunistic that they literally say, hey, you know, I just started my new job at Goldman. Here's my resume. I mean, you've been there a week. You haven't done anything. Don't, you know, and all I'm saying is, here's my resume because I want you, Bill, to think about me if there's something else that comes along. No, you think right now about doing a great job where you are. Be known for doing good work, and that will carry the day.
Well, that's a great place to close. Again, please check out the financialnarrative.org website. We'd love for you to join the community. It's growing. We have lots of conversations, and they've found some creative ways to build relationships in these weird days. But Bill Heyman, thank you for all your advice.
Andrew, thank you. It was really pleasant. And the other thing too is, if there are people that didn't get their questions answered because we ran out of time, or they didn't feel the answer they got was satisfactory and they want to dive more into it, just get a hold of Ashley, and she can get a hold of me, and I'm happy to do that.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Bye, guys. Stay safe.